My name is Brent Mittelstadt. I'm from the University of Oxford, and I've very kindly been asked to host this panel, which is on the right for offline alternatives in the digital world. We have quite a interesting discussion lined up, some very interesting panelists, and I think I'm interested in this topic because there's quite a few senses that we can talk about rights and we can talk about offline alternatives. I mean, are we, for example, speaking about a enforceable right where there would be a duty for manufacturers to provide offline devices or alternative offline devices? Is this something that we can legislate for? And in what sense does something need to be offline? Can you have a smart technology, for example, that just has limited functionality when it's not connected to the internet, and would that be enough? So these are just some initial thoughts, but I will turn things over to our moderator, Tobias Matzner, and he'll introduce the panel and get things going.
Yeah, thank you very much, Brent, for the introduction. Thank you all for coming. So on this panel, we want to bring an issue up that came up in our discussions on Internet of Everything, Internet of Things, smart cars, smart TVs, and so on. So devices which we've been knowing already and be using already in our daily lives, and now they become networked. And some people voice their concern or desire to still have the choice to use those devices as they knew them before, and to continue using those devices without having the networking facilities, without having the services that come from that, but without having the privacy worries and everything that entails. Once this issue was up, we noticed that there are quite strong intuitions on that topic, going to quite distinct directions. So some treat it almost as a matter of course that there should be such a right. Some say this is naive or Luddite, and some say it is even antisocial because the networking capabilities provide safety, justice, and so on, for example, in the case of smart cars. And individual privacy concerns should not trump that. So since we found that there's so distinct intuitions on the topic, we thought we should start a debate on that. Also because this does not only pertain to network devices, the Internet of Things, but also on a more general level to the very topic of this conference. The conference is infrastructure and invisibility. So the idea is, the question is, how can we relate to the infrastructure, and especially the invisible infrastructure, that very much structures our life right now? Is it just a configuring of this infrastructure, or is there a stronger right to say, I don't want to be part of that, I don't want to be touching that? And we just wanted to gather ideas from all kinds of perspectives on this problem to really get a debate going rather than to solve it. And I'm amazed that we have a brilliant set of speakers here, which I'll very shortly introduce to not take too much time. Although all their other work deserves every bit of mention, I'll relate that to Google or Startpage, being on a privacy conference. So we'll be starting with Hille Koskela. I hope I got this last name right.
Yes.
Okay. He's a professor in human geography, but also a very strong voice in surveillance studies. She works in Turku in Finland, and she has numerous publications in surveillance studies which stand out since they highlight the ambivalence of visibility and surveillance, and also, which I think is very important, gender issues in surveillance. Hille will be followed by Katleen Gabriels, who works here at the Free University in Brussels on a project which quite goes to the heart of what we're discussing today. It's called The Hidden Morality of Continuous Connectivity. Then we'll be hearing an input from Ero Balsa. Ero is a PhD candidate at the KU Leuven, and he works in privacy and social networks and privacy-preserving access to social and to network devices in general. And finally, we hear my colleague from the Forum Privacy who organizes this panel, Carsten Ochs. He's a postdoc at the Department for Social Theory at the University of Kassel in Germany, where he works in a social theory of privacy from a post-liberal, post-bourgeois perspective. So without further ado, we'll have 4 statements and then open the discussion both among the panelists and with all of you. So Hille, please.
Oh, thank you. Is the microphone on? Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Tobias, for inviting me here. I'm really pleased and I'm really happy about the topic of the panel. Actually, I was asked to come to this conference by someone else, and I said, no, I don't. I mean, I'm not doing law stuff or whatsoever. But then the topic about being offline, or the right to be offline, was something I felt that I really had to come. A really fascinating topic. But the whole thing of videotaping, filming, and putting this online means that it's actually a contradiction in terms, because we are here to talk about right to be offline, but we have no right to be offline because we are already online. So it's kind of a tricky thing. Anyway, it's always compromising. Always, whatever you think about this. So I'm sitting here and going to be online with this videotape. My work, if some of you may know, is largely about revealing, like exhibitionism, empowerment, and such things. And finally, what I've said, like revealing as a political act, as something that means something more than what is a personal opinion on things. Today, however, I'm going to talk about rather personal perspective. I'm usually like distancing myself largely from the research topics, but today I thought that since I'm probably the most offline person ever, it's good to start with my own life. So I bought my home key. If somebody can put it, you can actually circulate it if I get it back, because it's the most offline thing you can actually imagine to have. It's so offline that it's hard to believe. So this is kind of a life choice, to live in the countryside with this kind of key, with no TV, no alarms, basically no other locks. I have 5 buildings, and this is the only lock we have, the main building. No motion detectors, not to speak about like automatic lights which go on. I've never used any kind of social media. I'm not in Facebook, not in Twitter, not in Instagram, WhatsApp, or whatsoever. I have never used Skype. Okay, so there's no, I wonder if I can find a person in this room who would be more offline than me. Okay, then the question is why? Why this lifestyle? Why do I want to be offline? Why do I want to be outside of everything? And I've been thinking about all kinds of emotions, all kinds of motivations which I might have. I'm not afraid of surveillance, so it's not about fear that much. It's basically about being irritated about all this compulsory thing around us. It's kind of a way to resist, but it's not an easy way to resist, and it's always, as I said, it's always compromising. But the most important thing, however, is the one word. It's actually in Finnish one word, suhteellisuuden taju, which is the only word I want to tell you today. It's a sense of proportion. And that's the whole thing. That's the feeling I have when I'm thinking about going like online. So sense of proportion in many ways. First of all, of course, in the terms of data storage, like how much you collect, how much you store, whatsoever data you have. That's not my topic really, but I can see that it's really problematic with non-democratic countries, for example. It's not a problem in countries like Finland, or it might be in the near future, but it hasn't been. But other things are more important, I think. Sense of proportion in terms of speed. I keep on telling in my work, in my office, to my boss that I am not an ambulance driver. I'm a professor of geography. So why do I have to do everything so quickly? Is there a reason? Anything else but this collective production of rush, especially I think in working environments. I think that speed, to increase the speed means that you easily lose the understanding of difference between small and big things. In Finnish you have this expression, nähdä metsä puilta, which means that to see the forest out of the trees. So that you are going into something too quickly to actually realize what is going on, what is happening. Speed also makes things superficial and thin. There's no time to think. There's no time to consider. There's no time to really figure out what is going on or what is important and what is not important. Then I think this sense of proportion also matters in terms of identity politics, like how we present ourselves in social media. It's already, I think, quite well known that in terms of Facebook, for example, people try to present the best side of themselves, the amusing, fun stories in their lives. Okay, if somebody's brother makes a suicide, it's not on Facebook, it's something else, it's serious. Then you talk, you go back to the old-fashioned way of talking to your friends rather than putting that online. So it's easily emphasizing the light and the most amusing stories and rumors as well. All kinds of rumors. So you observe also other people more than you would if you would be online. Then there's a question of trust, because private conversations easily turn into public expressions. And then who places what on what side and how, it's all kind of compromising in that sense. And then I think the most important thing is that it's about the sense of proportion in terms of what is important. Like if we talk about media topics, for example, there are self-made scandals, lots and lots of social production of fear, and I think the examples from Finland about this refugee stuff and all these cases about supposed rape cases or whatsoever, they are perfect examples of this. Like even the reporters, they write something quickly, they put it online, and by the morning, there already like hundreds of people have been commenting on it. And then it's actually produced by the online media, the whole scandal. There was no scandal necessarily, but if there's something, then the police is, for example, in Finland, police is completely lost because they don't know what to say. Somebody tells that, okay, they were like these asylum seekers, they were raping a woman, and then some reporter publishes it like online. By the morning, it's already spread out, and the police tries to say something. They try to say that they have no idea who did this. They actually may have no idea whether rape was happening or what is actually happening. But it's already gone and already going on. And then we have like people going on the streets to resist immigration, people going on the streets to resist those who resist immigration, and increasing social production of fear, which has been actually one of my most important research topics. And I think I would do anything to stop that, because it's really destructive to our society. It's so easy to make people be afraid, and it's so difficult to kind of try to do something else, like make people to consider, slow down, think about it, what actually happened, how should we react? Okay, some concluding thoughts. I have no really conclusions, but some tentative talks. For me, I think being offline, I agree that it may be selfish, it definitely may be antisocial, and it can definitely make me feel lonely. I'm not sure whether absence of control means absence of public sphere, because I think that being sort of outside of this whole thing, it gives me a position of seeing things more, maybe not more objectively, but something like that, from the distance, to understand what is there, and what is there. And then probably next time I'm going to talk, I'm not this offline anymore, because there's also the issue of right to participate turning into pressure to participate. So it's increasingly difficult to stay offline. And I think I hand you over to Katleen.
Thank you very much. So could you, okay.
Yeah, I've prepared some slides for my statement, which is not really a statement, it's more a reflection or a further problematization. To narrow things down, I will focus my statement on other tracking. So nowadays we don't only follow each other on social network sites, but there's also a plethora of devices available or apps that allows us to track one another in a remote way, and I want to discuss some ethical implications about that.
You have a clicker here.
Oh, here it is. Didn't see it. Oh, yeah. So in this metric-based world, where we also see the quantified self movement, together with, of course, the notion of virtualization, we approach one another ever more in terms of data and algorithms, which also engenders a situation of quantified otherness that we meet one another through algorithms and also at a distance as a data set. And I want to focus my short presentation on everydayness, because when it comes to other tracking, there's of course a lot of things to say about how governments track us or companies, but I want to focus on how easily we all participate in this other tracking by giving some examples. For instance, here on the left side we can see a spotter, which is a GPS-enabled device that you can buy for not so much money in Belgium and in the Netherlands. And it focuses on parents to track their children when they leave the house, so they can always have access to their whereabouts. And the device is connected to the parent's smartphone. The parents can also install a perimeter. So in terms of this invisible fence, that if the children would step out the perimeter, the parents are being alarmed. And you also have a lot of mobile applications, for instance, children tracker, so you can always have access to your children's data. Another example is framed as adultery apps, so to track your partner at a distance without him or her knowing, because there is a lot of apps that allow you to install it on the target phone without the person knowing that it is being installed. Yet another example is being tracked at work. On the left side you can see a screenshot of one top spy, which is making publicity for employers to track their employees, framed as impressive cost-cutting spyware. And another way to track employees at work is by means of gamification, just to give one example. So to make use of game elements in a non-game setting and to make visible the results on a leaderboard. So you can always see how you have been performing, and you can also earn badges and points. And by being always tracked, the employer also has access to data on your productivity. In healthcare, there's also a lot of examples of other tracking. For instance, which is also, in this case, there's a lot of positive aspects because it allows patients to go to the hospital less often, because the devices are also connected to the medical team, for instance, the blood pressure, the weight, so they can actually stay at their homes more often. And this is just something that I ran into lately. It's called FitBark. Also, your pet can be tracked at a distance to monitor, in this case, your dog's activity and sleep monitor. So this brings me to the broader question, to what extent is it a good thing that we constantly keep track of one another by means of continuous connectivity, because all these devices allow us to track one another at a distance, either with informed consent or either covertly. So I will just discuss some ethical implications. Of course, the problem of power asymmetry between the tracked other and the tracking individual. These other tracking devices have been framed as truth-making machines because they strive for objectivity, for transparency. And of course, this also relates to the well-known phrase, but if you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear. It's not a problem that all these data will be in the open. But of course, together with the power asymmetry, there is this control arising, because if you have access to someone else's data, for instance, health data or other sensitive information, you always have this factor of control. And from a moral philosophical point of view, you could say that our moral relations are being automated. Think, for instance, about the perimeter. If you get an alarm that a person walks out of the perimeter, you really discipline the other person by means of technology. You moralize this person, and to what extent does that affect his or her own deliberate choice making? Because the technology can always see what you're doing. Also, with regard to the leaderboards, how much room is there still left for autonomy and deliberation? Also, especially within the case of parents that are tracking their children, to be confronted in a situation where you, for instance, did something wrong and then you have to explain it to your parents. It's also a way of growing up, and it's also a way to become, for instance, more self-reliant, to be more autonomous. So parents that want to track their children all the time, aren't they taking away very significant life experiences of their children by intruding in their privacy all the time? And it has been mentioned before by Hille, what I would frame as monetization of fear, especially in the case of the parent-child relation. The parents have this responsibility to protect their children from getting hurt or being harmed. But of course, they also should be aware of probability statistics. There's not so much chance that a stranger will do something to your child. But they very easily believe the phrases of marketeers instead of the scientific data on the fact that we live in quite a safe world, especially here in Belgium and the Netherlands, where this marketing about spotter is being made. And I once saw this great cartoon of someone who was afraid because he forgot to be afraid. So that also relates to the tension between fear and safety. Also, we have to accept that we cannot erase every uncertainty with technology. And also, for instance, in the case of the parent-child app, there's also this false feeling of security, because even if you are being alarmed, how much can you do from a distance? There's not much to do if you're, for instance, 50 kilometers away at home. It also relates, and I'm sure this will be the topic of probably all the panels at this conference, to vulnerability. First of all, of the people. For instance, consider other tracking within e-health. There's a lot of vulnerable people, but also intimate data, and also the technology is very vulnerable. So this vulnerability is playing at different levels. So to end, some thoughts on the idea of going offline. This whole idea is also, of course, very much context related. When it concerns parents, I think they should disconnect more. But for instance, when you talk about the telemonitoring within e-health, it also is a good thing, because research shows that people who are dependent, they are willing to give up some privacy if that would give them more autonomy. So that really is this trade-off. And if they would be reluctant against the technology, they would also not be able to make use of the functionalities or the advantages of it. So that would mean a complete opt-out. So that is really a difficult trade-off for them. I think instead of going offline, maybe we should talk about the right not to be measured. I think this is something that is becoming more and more important. Also, when it relates to discussions of data ownership or data mining. And I think my most important point is the fact that people are very morally chaotic. And I think we should start with individual responsibility as well. Because when you look at the research, people don't really read terms of service, so they give their informed consent without being really informed. And there is this interesting example of this Dutch supermarket. They wanted to introduce a digital customer card, and they saw their customers were not really interested in it until they had the brilliant idea to give a free cake with it. People are, and that's why I want to focus on everydayness. We're so easily convinced to participate in this. Also, for instance, the Fitbark, I know it was for pets, but it relates to more general things. The health is a choice thing. So you can, it also relates to personal responsibility, but from, I think, the different, or the wrong perspective. So, I'm fully responsible for everything. Yeah, of course, I want to get a lot of data about it. So that would give me a lot of transparency about my own health. And also, the track and share habit is really like this everyday habit. We're getting used to this visibility, this transparency. We don't really problematize the fact that we're taking pictures all the time and put them online. So I want to emphasize the importance of critical thinking, the think for your own, start with yourself. And to generate some public debate on the right not to be measured. And I guess my time is up.
Thank you very much, Katleen. You're perfectly on time.
Okay.
And we'll continue with you, Ero.
Okay. So good afternoon, everyone. So I was invited to this panel to bring a computer science perspective. And as a privacy researcher, I am very familiar with the idea of actually giving up on our privacy by being online, right? We encounter numerous privacy problems and security problems by being online. But of course, at the same time, we also get lots of benefits and new services by being online. Precisely, for instance, in terms of security, we get access to services such as security updates. We get access to services such as we can report on new vulnerabilities as soon as they are detected. And we can also do, for instance, periodic backups of our data to storage that we don't even have to manage. So yes, offline might be good or might be secure in terms of security and privacy for some things, but then being offline also means giving up on many services and resources that might be actually very useful and very convenient for us. Now, as a privacy engineer, of course, the idea of going offline doesn't really sound too well for the main reason that it mainly means giving up on all these services that are being provided by connecting ourselves online. The thing is that, of course, if we don't want those services, we can simply remain offline, but if we want them, we want to go online. The problem is, as a privacy engineer, we have to find solutions, and we attempt to design systems, to redesign systems, or to provide tools to actually make access to those services privacy-friendly, privacy-preserving. So in order to have a more, let's say, structured or technical discussion about whether or not it makes sense to have a right to go offline from the technical point of view, I'd like to make a bunch of points, 3, 4, I think. So the first of them is that we should clearly define what it means to be offline. Normally we think about being online as being connected to the internet. But in terms of privacy, there are other ways of actually infringing our privacy, or of getting our data. For instance, if we think about the smart grid and we think about smart meters, smart meters are these devices which are supposed to be measuring our electricity consumption continuously and reporting back to us and to the service provider so that we can do a better management, or the service provider actually can do better management of how much electricity is provided at each point. Now, the communication back to the provider, which can be very privacy invasive because it reveals a lot of information about what we do, when we do it, and so on, doesn't have to be necessarily over the internet. It can be done using alternative channels, such as, I don't know, like telephone networks or radio networks. So those are not connected to the internet, but at the same time, they're in a way online. The other example is, for instance, TV. So we now see that our TVs are being connected to the internet, and we can get a lot of new services, but at the same time, a lot of data can be transmitted to through the internet to the vendors and to the content providers, and this can be very privacy invasive. Again, the internet is not the only way that content providers can use to actually infringe our privacy. We can think, for instance, of the traditional cable infrastructure that normally is a one-way broadcast, but it could also be configured as a switch broadcast in the sense that RTV could be sending back information to the base station and reveal what kind of programs we are watching, what kind of shows we are watching. So that's one of the first questions. In the sense of we are going to use the right to be offline as a way to protect our privacy, what does it mean to be online or offline? Now, the second point that I'd like to make is we are thinking about designing or coming up with offline alternatives. And my question is, how should these offline alternatives should look like? We have, or I could think of two main options. So the first of them would be simply remain with the services that we were used to, for instance, the TV, the offline TV, the TV that we all know. So that would be basically, in the future, offering support for legacy systems that we call. Or we might actually want to ask for support for functionalities that have become online. So for instance, video on demand, we might actually want to get those services also offline. So without really being connected to the internet, we would like to get access to those services. So both of these options present their own problems. So for instance, with respect to support for legacy systems, we have problems of backwards compatibility. We have problems of possibly the duplication of infrastructures. We also have problems of, for instance, many standards, different standards, like a fragmented market of standards and devices, and so on. And for the sense that, or in the case that we'd like to have access to services which would be typically provided online, also offline, we'll have to actually think of how we're going to deliver those services, what kind of networks and infrastructures we're going to use, what is the cost of them, and whether it is feasible technically. Then another point that I'd like to make is, more the fundamental question of why do we demand this right to remain offline, and whether these properties that which offline alternatives are supposed to provide us, the question of whether we can also get those properties by being online. And this might sound very strange, but for instance, if we think of privacy, for instance, we can actually devise, we can design systems in a way that they are privacy preserving, and they can give us privacy properties which are very similar to the ones that we would get offline, but benefiting at the same time from the services that we would get online. And I can give a couple of examples. So for instance, in the case of the smart grid, again, going back to the smart meters that transmit information regularly back to the electricity provider, we can actually do, and there's script involved in this, and I won't go over the details, but we can use privacy-preserving mechanisms to actually do aggregates of the individual consumptions within a street or within a network, so that we can actually share information with the electricity provider about a certain zone. And that should be enough to actually allow the electricity provider to do better load balancing, to do a more rational energy production, and at the same time we would get properties which are similar to the ones that we would get offline. And again, we would still get at our homes or individual readings, and we could do the management of our own use of electricity better. And then the other example is TV. So for instance, in the case of TV, being connected to the internet gives us, again, access to different services, such as video on demand, contextual information. It also gives us access to new TV channels. But of course, recent research has also shown that this new connection can be used to actually share to the vendor and share with content provider information about our viewing behavior, what channels we're watching, which shows we're watching. Well, privacy researchers have come up with solutions to actually prevent this problem. And one of these solutions will be to actually install a proxy between the TV and the entry point to the internet that can actually mediate and decide which information is going to be transmitted, which applications are going to be accepted, and whitelist or blacklist those applications which we want, prevent actually the leakage of our private information. Now, to the extent that we can actually use privacy technologies to provide certain properties that would be desirable offline, can we or do we need to talk or ask about the right to remain offline? To what extent do we really need this? But again, in terms of privacy. And then on the other hand, there is a fundamental difference between online and being offline, of course. So being offline and understood as this absence of back and forth communication, it's completely different from being online, where even if the communications between devices are mediated by privacy technologies, there is still room for attacks, there is still room for subversion and simply circumvention of these technologies. So these technologies are not foolproof, of course. Then it also would depend a lot on how we actually implement these technologies. So it's not the same to design the system from the very beginning, make it privacy by design and privacy by default, than to actually have a very insecure system and demand the users of the system to install third-party privacy-preserving tools to protect themselves. This also questions what is the relation between the vendors and the content providers with the user, what kind of technologies they are releasing. And so one important point that we can consider is that if the users are going to be requested to actually install all these additional privacy technologies on top to defend themselves, maybe the burden is too big and it would be simply better, they would be simply better off by simply unplugging their devices from the internet. So again, we have to consider the complexity. And the last point that I'd like to make is, in a world where we have a lot of devices which are online, can we actually expect certain devices to be offline? Even if we have the right to be offline and we can decide, for instance, well, I will have my TV offline, then we know that, for instance, certain marketers are using cross-device tracking. And this means that one of the devices will emit a certain sound, which will be recognized by another device, and they will be able to exchange information, even if it's only one way. So in this sense, I might be watching my great offline TV, but then my phone is picking up on the sounds that the TV is emitting. So to what extent am I having an offline TV, or the kind of privacy properties that I would expect from having my TV offline? This is on an individual level, but also at the community level. If we go back to the example of the smart grid, what happens when I am the only one that has an offline meter, and all the neighborhood actually has smart meters? Then it will be very obvious for the electricity provider to deduce how much I am consuming, because it has the total and it has very fine-grained readings of all the people in the neighborhood. So to what extent am I getting the advantage of having an offline meter? And I think this is, yeah.
Thank you very much, Ero. That was pretty informative. And we'll have Carsten.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm really happy to share my thoughts with you, and I'd like to set out with a personal note also. Some 10 years ago, when I attended a master program named Interactive Media, I was faced with the task of producing a practical work for the final exhibition, and I decided to create a piece questioning the so-called information society. So the work was meant to make users reflect on the nature of informational power. As discussions at the time held the view that being part of digital networks was the absolute condition for participating in the information society, I developed, with the help of a programmer, a fake video game highlighting the exclusionary character of the information society. So what I want to say is that at that time, the crucial political question posed was how to get as many people as possible into these socio-digital networks. And today we rather ask, or we tend to ask, how to keep these networks at arm's length. And I wonder why this is so, and what does it mean exactly to keep digital networks at arm's length? This is what I want to reflect upon a bit in the next 15 minutes or so. So the panel description refers to, I quote, claims for a right to network-free or offline alternatives, unquote. The simplest way to stay free from digital networks, it seems, is to enable people to lead a non-digital life in society. So is there a right to lead a non-digital life under contemporary socio-technical circumstances? I'm not an ethicist, so I cannot base my answer on ethical considerations. However, from a sociological point of view, my answer to this question would be no, there can't be such a right. As a sociologist, I suggest to deal with this question from a collective point of view. Hence, we have to assert that in current socio-technical environments, say in Europe, social life in its entirety rests on digital technologies, right? Now let's compare the situations with the historical analogy of the printing press. From the 15th century onwards, social life began to be based more and more on processes that involve printing, reading, and writing as a consequence. In socio-technical networks that base their functioning to a great extent on printing, one only has a right to live a non-literal life if one completely abandons society. And something similar goes for a right to lead a non-digital life today. The right to live such a life amounts to the right to move into the woods and live in peace. Of course, one has the right to quit society, but obviously choosing this option comes with a considerable, perhaps even existential price. Manuel Castells, in a United Nations research paper about 15 years ago, determined the price as follows. It's not working. The most critical distinction, he says, in this organizational logic is to be or not to be in the network. Be in the network and you can share and over time increase your chances. Be out of the network or become switched off and your chances vanish, since everything that counts is organized around a World Wide Web of interacting networks. End of quote. If this still holds true today, it follows that living within society necessarily means to lead a life within digital networks. Claiming to live within such a society in a perfectly analogous fashion amounts to claim to remaining unchallenged by reading and writing skills in a society characterized by the printing press. Because practically speaking, everything is tied up with such skills. So if anything, one has the right to acquire them. And from an historical point of view, the spread of these skills seems to have had politically emancipatory outcomes. So on the one hand, there is no right to lead a non-digital life in the sense just discussed, unless one opts to move out from current socio-technical settings. On the other hand, there's a right to be part of the network. We therefore have to deal with the question of the right to analogous alternatives under the premise that moving out of digital society is not an option. In other words, if we have a right to analogous practices, we only may be granted such a right while staying within digitized society. Thus, binary decision-making in the sense of you either opt for digitized society and accept your life to be digitized completely, or you opt for abandoning society for good is much too simple. To understand this, we first have to clarify what it means to live in a digitally networked socio-technical setting in the first place. And in a very interesting essay on denetworking and Netzung in German, Hamburg-based sociologist Urs Stehli accurately describes the excessive demands coming with the societal moral imperative of being networked. According to Stehli, the imperative is so strong that we even lack terms to describe the withdrawal of network links other than by turning to terms that carry the undertones of deficiency and exclusion. Meanwhile, in practice, exhausted subjects and overburdened social worlds are faced with problems stemming from over-networking, issues of capacity, efficiency, safety and security, and also privacy arise. So Steli consequently pleads for a positive notion of denetworking, and he's very clear about the unreasonableness of tying such a notion to situations of social isolation, such as living on a faraway island. Quite in contrast, denetworking takes place within social networks. It therefore must be conceived as a cultural technique to be applied within social environments and not as the cutting off of all relationships to society. So following Steli, we can find a kind of blueprint for conceptualizing denetworking techniques in Georg Simmel's work on the metropolis and mental life. Of course, Simmel developed his ideas in view of a very different setting, urban social life at the turn to the 20th century, but still we may draw on the metropolitan social setting as an analogy to current socio-technical networks. In the metropolis, life is characterized by bodily closeness, lack of space, observability, and so on. Against this background, people develop a specific mental technique so as to cope with the circumstances, and I quote, the mental attitude of the people of the metropolis is to one another may be designated formally as one of reserve. If the unceasing external contact of numbers of persons in the city should be met by the same number of inner reactions as in the small town, in which one knows almost every person he meets and to each of whom he has a positive relationship, one would be completely atomized internally and would fall into an unthinkable mental condition. It assures the individual of a type and degree of personal freedom to which there is no analogy in other circumstances. End of quote. So if we conceive of the metropolis as a kind of large socio-technical network, we find that within this network people develop techniques allowing for the preservation of room to maneuver. One person's reserve is a guarantee for preserving another person's room to maneuver despite the severe limitation of space, despite far-reaching observability, and despite the principal accessibility of everybody. So in this sense, if we regard the metropolis as a socio-technical network, we learn that the social learning process induced by the novel situation is not limited to pressing social actors to come to a decision between only two alternatives. So if you want to live in the metropolis, you either accept to be accessible by everyone or you move out. This is not the case. So instead, social learning results in the development of techniques that allow for non-accessibility within the network. Of course, there are some features of social life that one has to accept in the metropolis in such an environment. For example, the overcrowding, lack of familiarity, and so on. But that does not mean that there was no possibility at all to shape the network and the practices occurring in it. Simmel's remarks on the metropolis oftentimes have been interpreted as a cultural critique of metropolitan life. The indifference of the people towards each other may be understood as dehumanizing emotional blunting. However, if we do not take up a humanist stance from the outset, we may recover some civilizing potential in such an indifferent attitude. In fact, a potential that is prerequisite for a certain way of life in such networks. And I again follow Steli's train of thought when I now turn to Fran Tonke's reading of Simmel. For Simmel, she says, I quote, "For Simmel, relations of indifference or even aversion are the only feasible way of being together in a crowded city. Any one person might be too much to take on top of everything else that is going on around you. What appears as dissociation is in fact the basic form of urban sociation, one that allows us to coexist with all these largely unknown others. Not interacting with others in this sense becomes a primary condition for urban social life, securing individual calm together with relative social peace," end of quote. So from a reading of Simmel, Tonkes develops a notion of an ethics of indifference, an ethics of reserve that has everything to do with collective practices of privacy in public. From Tonke's point of view, indifference under certain socio-technical circumstances may be understood as a social virtue, a virtue made out of the necessities created by urban life. Most probably, we need to reinvent social virtues and cultural techniques in a similar fashion today, and you already mentioned a whole bunch of techniques, so as to come to terms with social life in digital networks. We are called upon to resemble the social, and Tonke provides us with a pretty fruitful directory how to proceed in this. And another quote, very short one, she says, "The power of the social imagination lies not only in making connections with others, but in allowing a latitude for disconnection, in accepting dissociation as a social relation, and valorizing the very weakness of weak ties," end of quote. And I find these remarks very insightful, and even more so as they were made in the seemingly very, very different context of urban life. For what follows from Tonke's argument is that de-networking neither amounts to moving out from the network, nor does it amount to cutting off social relationships. Instead, we may consider de-networking as social relationships that exist in absence of social interaction. Or more precise, the very socialness of the relationship even inheres in the absence of social interaction. So people's sociality is constituted by their mutual abstaining from interaction, and thus in a more socio-technical sense, offline alternatives may be conceived as the absence of socio-digital interaction. This is precisely what allows us to develop a notion of privacy that fits current socio-digital networks, I think. We need to conceive of privacy as a particular configuration of the socio-technical networks that we call society, and privacies then are collective modes to shape the socio-technical landscape as to whom or what is accessible to whom or what. And obviously these modes and this shaping is of utmost importance. I'll be finished soon. If we keep in mind where network as an anthropological concept comes from or originates. Media theorist Erhard Schüttpels already a while ago clarified that the net as a cultural technique descends from trapping techniques. The word, the metaphor, and the notion have been and still are tied to the task of making prey. In this sense, all human and socio-technical networks are always on the prowl, aiming to make prey. Finally, taking all that I have said so far into considerations and somewhat channeling it into a summarizing argument, I hope to be able now to answer my initial questions. Or the questions the panel poses, actually. Do we have a right to lead a non-digital life? No, in contemporary society we don't, I would say. Still, do we have a right to offline alternatives? I would say, yes, in fact we do, precisely because we cannot claim a right to a non-digital life. For at the very least, we have a right to live within our socio-technical networks without falling prey to them. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Carsten. So since all of the speakers have been amazingly on time, I would take the chance to pull a few of the strands that developed here together and hear your comments on that, and then we'll be having your questions. So I think, Katleen, you pointed out two very important issues, namely that networking relations are, first of all, power relations. They're not neutral in terms of power. And secondly, we are not always the persons to decide whom to be in a network relation with. So the parent-child makes that quite clear. And the analogy to the dog can give you all kinds of fantasies I don't want to develop here. And then we heard somehow two kinds of different approaches to confronting those power relations. One is just quitting. One is actively confronting it in a sense of finding new practices, reconfiguring it. But I would like to hear from all of you, whoever wants to answer, taking into account those two alternatives, with Hille's beautiful Landsat single key living and Carsten's metropolitan alternative to that. I think those two analogies blended into each other beautifully. And if you bring this PowerPoint from Katleen in there, I would like to hear what you think about that. And another thing is that Ero pointed out quite strongly that a lot of the desires we have to remain offline could also be somehow met with digital alternatives, with new technologies that enable all kinds of privacy and other protections. But then you have to somehow, and I think this is another important point Hille raised, trust somebody. You have to trust the people that do that. And I was wondering whether this entire debate or the entire desire to remain offline is in the end not just a symptom for a lack of trust in the very institutions, networks, whatever, who's providing those services to us. So I think this is two connections I wanted to make, and I would be very happy to hear your comments on those. Whoever wants to.
You want our comments, not the...
Your comments,
okay.
yes.
Yeah, okay. I think it's overwhelming, but I think it's fascinating that there are two women who are sort of critical and two men who are sort of pro these things. What I was thinking is that I'm not sure about SIML, how it's applied to this thing, because there is no such asymmetries of power as Katleen was talking in the case of Metropolis. In the case of downshifting or doing this slow life, of course, what I told is a story, and it doesn't mean that anyone can be completely out of this. But then, if you are not critical, then you are completely in. So it's always compromising, and I think it's on an everyday level, to whomever of you I'm talking to, everybody feels too busy, and I wonder why. I mean, shouldn't we be sort of living a balanced life? And what does all this networking add to the balanced life? Is it easy, or is it like, I can see the point Ero made about the services, and that you lose the possibility to use the services if you refuse to go online. But sometimes I'm not sure whether it's so destructive to lose the services. I'm not sure. I don't know whether I answered your question.
Yeah. Somebody else? Yeah.
Well, yeah, perhaps just one remark on you just said living in networks, it's always about power relations, and there are two possibilities or two ways to deal with this quitting and confronting. And I'd say that privacy and all the techniques, like contemporary techniques of reserve, which Ero actually presented us with, they are actually ways of confronting these power relations. And I would say, I don't know whether this is always about going offline and in what sense it means to go offline, but it is definitely pretty much about the right of, not falling prey to digital networks, the ones we live within. So that what comes up to my mind.
Yeah, so I can briefly comment on what you were saying, Hille, about those services. Of course, we are making the assumption that those services are desirable, but I mean that might not be necessarily.
They may even be desirable, but then you have to choose.
Of course.
How much you desire,
Yeah, so
and what's the other option?
So I think that the privacy engineer perspective is that we assume first that those services are desirable, and we actually modify them or enhance them so they can be privacy preserving and meet other people's needs. And then with respect to the comment that you were making on trust, that we need to trust someone. So I think that one of the ways that we typically use to solve that issue is to actually enhance transparency, to have open source code, so that people can read read it, can inspect it, and can actually have like a model of distributed trust, rather than I have to trust this company or I have to trust this government. So then the role of open source code, open standards is very important to actually distribute that trust.
Okay.
I just wanted to add something quickly also
Sure.
on the power asymmetries, because of course people are not passive receivers of technologies, and again taking the parents as an example that track their children, we see in research that children find inventive ways to escape parental control. For instance, that lying that their battery that they ran out of battery, or for instance by giving their phone to someone else. So and this also relates to trust relations, of course. I don't think it's very realistic to say that just quit, because in many ways these devices make our lives better, and also you don't really have a choice in many cases. For instance, if you're looking for a job and you don't want, for instance, email, I'm quite sure that you will not be given the job. But that does not mean that we cannot find a way to have a debate on this and a negotiation, and also to look at it as some sort of continuum, and just mark down how far we want to go, and what people think is desirable.
Okay, so are there any questions from the audience? If you have some, please approach one of the mics. Yeah. Please go ahead. Andrew's next.
Hello, Tobias Morschers from Datenschutzraum Germany. First of all, I want to address something you said. Not being online may make you unsocial. So I wanted to tell you, from my point of view, it may be exactly the opposite. I don't know you, how social you are, but there are many people. I won't go so far to tell everyone who's using online services is antisocial, but if you look at many people, and when I was much smaller and people were on holiday, they were talking to each other, and they were laughing, were doing stuff, and now you see them all sitting in the lobby of the hotel with their smartphone and texting each other something useless messages, not meaning anything. And there's the next point. If you use these online services, there's a lot that gets lost on the way. That means I have been in several groups. I'm not very active on Facebook or any other of these antisocial networks, but I'm involved in mailing lists and so on. And what I see is the more people communicate with such services, there is no sound of the voice, there is no face where you can see in the mimic how it is meant. And on the long term, this makes people misunderstand each other, and that leads to very strong tension between them. And another point what's also going to miss is the possibility to talk about everything that interests one or another due to censorship. So yes, you can say we don't want to censor, but if you look at the actual debates about hate speech, about using these online services in Russia or in any country that is not very democratic, then the state tells the service providers to filter what's going on. And if I have a social discussion with friends, I can also discuss stuff that is out of the norm, that vary me, and then I can come to the conclusion, okay, I don't have to worry about migrants or something else. If the network just filters out anything I say, nobody will respond to that. So from my point of view, it's a very difficult topic. And one short point to you, you say, yes, we can make it private. I doubt that. Technologies become so complex, you have it easy to use, but what's behind you, nobody understands, not even the ones who build it.
I think we collect 2 questions and then
May I
have the
just
answers.
briefly respond? Just
Okay.
briefly, because I think, yeah, you made the point, and I think I'm not talking about the hate talk because it would take so much time. But I would just say, since I told I'm going to be personal, so personally I prefer things to be deep and serious rather than shallow and superficial, and that's basically the point.
We have Andrew's question and then have an answer. Thank you.
Andrew Adams from Meiji University in Tokyo. I want to try and flip the question round a little. One of the speakers talked a lot about children. There's 2 debates that I think are relevant here that have happened in the past about choices parents make about their children, which is the question on certain types of congenital deafness and whether you have a cochlear implant at a young age as soon as they're able to do so, or whether you wait until a child is old enough to make their own choice, because it's a choice the parents make, but it changes your brain function permanently. And if the parents choose at 18 months to have it implanted, or the child then chooses or not to have it at 12 or 14, it is a permanent choice that is made at the age of 18 months. The other one was the Roma, who in many European countries were forced to send their children to local schools where they were forced to learn to read. And again, you have the same issue. When you are raised in an oral culture, you have different brain structures than when you're raised in a written culture. So flipping the question of the panel on its head, what about the question of should parents have the right to choose an offline life, not just for themselves, but for their children? Or should they be forced to allow their child to be trained into the digital world, which will, and we're seeing more and more evidence of this from neuroscientists, which will change their brain structures?
Go ahead.
Well, that's obviously a very large question to answer in a very associative way. I think the answer lies in the middle path, and in the middle. No, you have to make your children digitally literate, because they will start. Or they will be behind, because you cannot really avoid all the technologies, and you just have to guide them into this digital literacy, I will say. But on the other hand, parents should also be more digitally literate, and I'm referring here, of course, to the notion or the hype or the phenomenon about parenting. So before the child is born, there are already pictures of the echo on Facebook, and then the child or all the pictures are exponentially being posted online. So, and here this child does not have a choice, and this also relates to privacy, and it's also the tricky question, because parents are responsible for their children, so in the end they make the decisions. But I think that if you as a parent say, okay, we will let you grow up without any computer, that's also not realistic. I think, of course, at schools they also work with computers. I think it's better to guide your child, because I also talk a lot with teenagers on these issues. I give workshops on digital ethics. And what I see is that there's not a lot of conversation. And for instance, right now we have this debate in Belgium about the fact that children are very tired at school. And one of the explanations is because they're allowed to take the smartphone into their bedroom. So it's not the question, when do you send your child to bed, but when does he or she switch off the mobile phone. And that, of course, it's going too much to the other extreme. So I think it's a question of finding the middle path and guiding your child into this digital world in a very literate or with a lot of digital literacy, but on the same or parents also have to be more gain more digital literacy, because they're also not or they're also not really, how do you say that, they also make a lot of mistakes, I would say, to put it more bluntly. And I think this also relates to the question of general awareness about what these things do to us in the long run. But just saying no to them is not the good answer.
Thanks. You wanted to add something?
I would just, I'd like to reply to your remark, the first one. Thanks a lot. I think it raises important questions. And it sounded like you're calling upon us to leave these networks, don't use it. Because being online is not social, while being offline is. I think it sounded a bit like that. I don't think, I mean, of course you can do so many things online and you can do so many things offline. So that's what I actually wanted to clarify. It's always, it's too simple if we work with these binaries. I think there is online socialness, definitely, you're right, you're losing a lot, you know, like face expressions and so on, but also you're gaining a lot, I guess. So, I don't know, I wouldn't make a strong, like, normative statement. Plus, I think both so-called realms, the digital and the non-digital, they are so tightly interwoven that many people, of course, don't think it makes sense to, categorically distinguish between the two. And I think this is precisely the reason for us to think about technologies and techniques where that ensure that we can stay analog or offline or whatever you call it. I think, you know, perhaps there's a right to don't be integrated into the smart grid. But if we want to talk about this, and it has to be decisions being made, like societal decisions being made in specific cases, you can't categorically decide on these issues, of course. But then we have, as a kind of like our starting point has to be, okay, these realms are so interwoven and we live within digital networks. It gives us many opportunities and chances. So let's see where we, can benefit from it and where it is better to stay analogous.
Sorry, is there still time?
Yeah, there's time. Okay, 5 minutes, as we've been told already.
5 minutes. Okay. Yeah. The intertwining thing, I think it's true, and it's not always either or. I think that, but okay. I don't know. I was thinking about this hate talk, and like, who wants to read hate talk which is not filtered? I'm not pro censorship, but for example, like 2 days ago, a student of mine came to me and wanted to start to do a PhD on some kind of issues related to immigration and this crisis in Europe at the moment. And his idea was to look at the talks in the internet. I was like, okay, it's going to be really heavy work. And I mean, I probably wouldn't be able to read all this stuff, not to speak about analyzing it. So I don't know, it's always complicated. Do we need censorship? If we do, why and what context, whether it's China or Russia or Finland or Belgium? But yeah, it's getting to the point that more and more often you have to use your real name when you want to comment something, and that's one way. It's kind of a self-censorship, but that's one way to filter the ugliest things out of it.
But I think this just already the the strength you need to read that as a scientist
Yeah.
shows how intriguing this idea of retweeting might be. There's another person with a very short question, please. We have 3 minutes.
Yep. Very briefly. doesn't
It's
work.
on, it's on. Just,
Yeah.
it will pick up.
What do you mean by being offline in real terms? Because you have been using the language of the rights, so right to be offline, not in the network. So if you look for a legal basis, I assume you are looking, for instance, in terms of privacy and privacy protection. And then there are a lot of issues that comes up. For instance, you don't need to have a smart device to be tracked or connected. I mean, your T-shirt with our feed, it's more than enough to be tracked continuously and find a lot of behaviors and attitude on yourself. So if we cast in that dimension, in the dimension of rights, and we cast in terms of right of privacy, the consequences may be much more far-reaching than just being offline from the net, because that would, for instance, imply the possibility to claim to have products and services and business model which are tailored to the fact that I want to stay offline. So to give you a very brief immediate example, being able to claim from telecommunication company to have the same speed for upload and download as business do, as individuals, basically, we are not allowed to do. So probably we need to be a little bit more precise when talking about the kind of right we are looking for with all the implications.
You want to add something else?
I think Ero was actually talking about the difficulty of defining these things.
Yeah, I think this has two sides. One is the technical side, so we have to look at all the possibilities, and then the legal side. But when we talk about the right, we talk about the right also in a more moral or just personal sense, in the sense to establish whether this claim some people have is a good claim in the first place. And then when we think it is a valuable claim in the first place, how to install that into legislation, of course, is another and highly intricate problem, and thanks for pointing that out. But I think the analysis we've been trying to get at was on a more abstract level right now. So unfortunately, we've run out of time. I think we have to continue this discussion, and I hope we will be doing that. Whoever wants to join, just contact us. And enjoy the rest of CPDP. Thank you very much for being here, and thank you very much for all of the brilliant speakers and Brent for chairing.